Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker, background screens for your faith or volunteer organization. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to inspire, influence, and impact church safety and security teams. We are protectors, guardians, ambassadors, and shepherds. We are about all things church safety and security, which starts with a ministry mindset and a servant's heart. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, James McGarvey, Paul Buckner, and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on social media, YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, and on the all-new Church Security app.
Well, good evening. At least I think it's evening. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast. I am James, and I'm joined by Paul this evening. Mike actually won't be joining us. He was feeling kind of under the weather a bit, so he would certainly appreciate your prayers. But
I think he's come down with a construction virus.
Yeah.
Poor guy. Say a prayer for him. He's had some woes around his house getting things taken care of. So
yeah, and that's not like a new deviation of the coronavirus. It's the construction virus. He's been working on this project for a long time. Like he had a contractor come over and look at his laundry room, and the contractor left the water running in the laundry room and disconnected stuff. And this has just been a like insurance craziness nightmare for him, because the contractor then disappeared and wouldn't repair the damage from the water. And so they're trying to get stuff done. But I think this was back in March that he was working on it, that this started happening. So he's been dealing with this most of the year. So yeah, definitely keep him in your prayers tonight. But if you just joined us, or you're joining us at a later time, feel free to click the like and subscribe button in that lower right-hand corner. And as always, you can visit us at churchsafetyguys.com and connect with us, reach out. If there's anything that we can help you with your ministry, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do the best we can to facilitate that. So I have to say, it's been a crazy busy week. And I had a chance, if you guys missed it, last week we had Gary Quisenberry on, and that was a great broadcast. Go back, and if you haven't heard it, go back right now, write it down, listen. No, not right now. I'm joking, but check it out, because Gary's a great guy, and he used to be he's a retired federal air marshal. And so he designed some of the training techniques for those guys. And I had a chance yesterday to go out with a friend of mine and shoot some, which I hadn't been out non-seriously shooting in a long time. And so I set something up akin to the nickel.
Yes,
the nickel challenge that Gary designed. And I have to say, I didn't do horribly. So I didn't do great, but I didn't do horribly. So
no details provided. Those of you following along at home, notice that there were no details provided.
It was funny when I went out there. I'm like, I should try out this. We've got new body cameras that we're testing and trying out. And I'm like, hey, I should take this out and clip it to me so I can record it and everybody can see how well I shoot, right?
Did something mysteriously happen to that footage?
Yeah, it didn't get recorded. That's what happened.
Weird.
Because when I got out there, I'm like looking around and I'm like, I don't know that I really want people seeing how horrible I am. I'll just tell you, I'm pretty horrible.
I have a friend that upgraded his firearm with that, and without thinking, he put a couple rounds to make sure it worked. And then he went out to shoot competitively and just completely stank the place up, because he wasn't thinking about the fact that all of this gear on his gun, new trigger and all this stuff was new. And he just stank up the competition. And on Facebook, somebody was recording him with his phone, and he walks up to it and goes, "In case you want to know how the competition went," blap, but he slaps the phone out of the guy's hand.
Well, I just recently picked up a Glock 43X, and so a couple months ago, and I really wanted to shoot it more, and so I thought I was going to shoot that, and it was going to be just kind of a relaxed thing, and my buddy was like, "No, I don't think so," and I'm like, "What? I just want to stand 20 feet from the target and shoot today," and he's like, "No." So he starts getting out. He's got these 55-gallon plastic barrels. So he starts setting up barrels in the field, and he's like, "You got to start back here." And I'm like, "Back there? That's like the end of the sanctuary." And he's like, "Exactly." He's like, "I want to see you run 80 feet, drop from cover, shoot around this." And I'm like, "What is this, the Matrix?" I'm like, "I'm not doing that."
Doesn't that constitute attempted murder?
And I'm like, "I'm going to be dead by the time I get through the 80 feet. And he's like, "That's the training, young Jedi." And I'm like,
nice.
So, but we did have a lot of fun. It was great to get out. It's been very windy lately. And so it was kind of cold, which was a little bit nicer to bundle up and shoot. But it's interesting to me, I'll say this, and then we can bring our guest in for tonight, but it's interesting to me that even just adding an extra 10 or 15 feet in your process, like we were standing about 20 feet away from the firing line, and then we ran up to the firing line and ran up to where the barrels were, and then ran around the barrels and then shot and did target acquisition. And it wasn't anything entirely crazy, but just having that practice and getting your blood pumping more than just standing there and shooting, I think was some great practice. So if you can do that and you can do it safely, I always recommend that, because it's quite a bit different. And think about it, if you were ever in a situation where you had to jog or run across the church, that's very applicable to be out of breath and have to be
absolutely. Well, and even if it's good practice if you're at the grocery store with your family and somebody comes up to do something and you have to run to try to get to safety and then shoot or whatever.
Sure. For sure. So, all right. So we'll bring in our guest this evening, and our guest is Steve McGraw, and he is joining us. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, sir. Appreciate
Looking forward to it.
And
so I understand you run a safety team for like a small church, fairly rural.
It's tiny. It's real tiny.
It's tiny. Yeah. He was explaining how far it was to have to go get something to me a minute ago before we got started. I was like, "Oh, never mind."
James was talking about running 80 yards to go do something. I'm like, "Yeah, that's about one hallway for us."
Right.
You got these fatal funnels everywhere.
Yes. 4 stairwells in our main auditorium building that are 3-stories tall.
Oh my
God! Imagine clearing and holding that.
Yeah. But we have a team of guys that are responsible to do all that.
You're like, "I don't do that."
You're like,
"That's people for that now."
That's below my pay grade.
No, I just have to take all the liability for telling them what to do and when to do it. That's all.
Oh,
yeah, well, no biggie.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyhow, I'm gonna say how I met Steve. Steve's actually been a member of our group, and I was going through some YouTube videos, and I came across he did some awesome videos for church safety and stuck him out there. And I didn't even realize he was in the group. So I apologize. That's my bad. But I emailed him I'm like, "Oh, here's, his videos are really cool. He's right on point." And I'm like, "I'm going to reach out to this guy." So I emailed him and I said, "Hey, would you consider coming on the broadcast?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm in your group. What's wrong with you? You're an idiot."
I didn't say it exactly like that. But.
No, he didn't. He was like, "Yeah, I'm in your group. I'd love to come on." So I appreciate it. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
But go for those of you. those listening that don't know, if you could just kind of walk us through your background and experience and how you got involved in church safety.
So I grew up in church all my life since the nursery days and age, so almost 40 now, so it's been a long time. When I went to go to college, our church has a college that it runs as well. So I decided to go to college here at our college. And so while I was there, I kind of already had the intention of going into law enforcement. That's where I felt God was calling me to go since I was about 12. So while in college, I took actually a music education course while I was doing that. But while taking that course, because I wanted to do some education and I like music, so I put two and two together. While doing that, they had security at the college and church and schools and so forth that we have. I knew the chief as kind of like a personal mentor for me. So I talked to him, and then I started doing that when I was 18, right when I came to college. Started working there, and it'll be 20 years in December that I've been doing church security for this department, the church I grew up in. Spent a few years in Wisconsin before coming back to college, but most of my life's been spent here.
So this is awesome. I want to comment on that really quickly, because at the same time that Carl Chen was getting into church safety and security, you've been doing this a very long time, and you run a very professional team in a very large environment. This is going to make for a great topic tonight, a great series of topics tonight. But I'm excited about this because you've seen really from the early days when people are like, wait, why would you need safety, any kind of safety or security at a church? What's wrong with you? All the way up to today. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah, the church security here existed back when I was a kid. It's been around longer than I've been around. So it's older. Our department's older than 40 years now. So I learned from my predecessors and so forth, and got to learn a lot from their mistakes. Then they passed those on to me to let me know what they learned. And so now I'm teaching the next generation,
Nice.
trying to teach them. But everything changes with times. I remember the days that nobody understood what church security was. There wasn't church shootings. There wasn't anything like that involved. There were days like that back in the day, but now that's all changed, sadly. And so now more churches are getting on board with that, which is a good and necessary thing. So, to kind of continue on where I was leaving off, I got into law enforcement. I got married a couple years after in 2003, and then 2004 I joined law enforcement. I worked for a small town department, for about 10 years. Some full time, some part time. That entire time, I still worked for the church, mostly full time for the church at that point. And then in about 2010 or so, my predecessor decided to retire from being the chief of the department. And I was explained that it was going to be a 5-year transition before I became the chief. And I was excited about waiting 5 years. And then I was in a meeting where the pastor just announced to everybody I was taking over that day, and the chief was already stepping down. So I was as surprised as everybody else was in the room, because that was a shock. But
look how overwhelmed he looks. Look how honored he looks.
So you were voluntold that you would be stepping up, essentially.
Starting today. Oh, okay, thanks. So that's kind of how I've been doing that for 10 years. But then I switched departments. My police department's about 7 years ago. I've been with the new department there for about 7 years. And with that, I do a lot of instructing, firearms instructing, taser instructing, all that kind of stuff. But I'm also in the SWAT team. I do all the drones and robots and entries and stuff like that with them. So I get to play around with a lot of cool toys. So, but that's kind of my full-time job. And then this is my part-time job now. But our department,
notice the quotation marks.
Yeah.
So you mean when you do that,
44 people total on our department. About right now, I think I've got about 8 full-time and part-timers, and the rest are what we would consider volunteers for the weekend services and so forth. So we have medics and so forth that are part of that team, and so that's kind of what we run on a weekly basis. Usually on duty, on service times, we have about 30 to 35 on duty at a time.
Wow.
So it's kind of like a small department just for one day. So it's kind of like a small city that runs for one day, and then everybody goes their way for a couple of days.
I was having that conversation with some of my pastors, because we're running now, nothing compared to what you're running, Steve, but we're running about 1,500 people a Sunday. And I said, guys, we're impacting the neighborhood traffic. We're backing up onto a highway. we're involving city and county level law enforcement in what we're doing. Obviously, we want to be a good neighbor. So one or 2 days a week, we're a small city, and we're planning on expanding to be able to hold about 2,150 souls. And I said, okay, guys, now we need to start thinking about shelter-in-place tornado stuff, because you can't evacuate 2,150 people that fast. And I got a blank stare, which was good, because I was like, oh, okay, good. So we're like it was like, oh, we've got to start thinking about that. And I'm like, thank God, before we started building the building. And I don't want to say anything that would make them sound like they're not doing their jobs right. But I'm trying to throw in things now so we can maybe design the building around it, because you can't evacuate 2,150 people that fast. Yeah. And we're in the Midwest, and tornadoes are like, surprise. And so they don't give you like hurricane warning where it comes in for days. It's not like no. And then the other thing I was saying was to them, we're now going to need to really start thinking about paying a paramedic to be at our church every service, because we'll hold an event and 2,000 extra souls will show up. Okay, that's a lot of people. And now you're going to have mechanical injuries and heart attacks and all these different things. And we need somebody right there, And so I'm excited about it, but we have to start thinking of ourselves as a city. And I love how you said that. James actually introduced that idea to me. Listen closely, guys. I'm giving James a compliment. Several years ago, he introduced me to the idea of, hey, bigger churches are a city 1 or 2 days a week. So.
Yeah, we're, considering our area department, our church is set right between, it's in the city called Hammond, and it's right between Gary and Chicago, if that gives you an idea, kind of the clientele that, and we send on average about 50 to 60 buses into Chicago and Gary and other areas to pick up kids and bring them in. So we get gang members sometimes from different areas, and they don't necessarily clash well together and so forth. So, we get our own gang wars within our little city for a weekend. But for the most part, they're pretty good kids and so forth that we deal with, and it's a good thing. But there are those little problems you deal with. In a small city, you always got some, you just have to deal with that. But
so do you have a tail gunner on the back of your church bus? I want that job.
I bring my armored vehicles in from my other job for the weekend.
Nice.
Yeah. So, we have great guys that are, trained as much as we can together as a team to kind of deal with these situations. But you mentioned the evacuations and so forth, or tornadoes. Yeah. That's been something we have to plan. Our building wasn't necessarily built around those ideas in place, like you're talking about, and we see some errors in our ways in that way. But we have to evacuate up to 200 kids under the age of 2 within a matter of minutes in the event of a fire from the 3rd floor. So that puts it in. We got to figure out how to carry 200 kids down the stairs real quick. So puts it into perspective on that end of it. How do you plan for that? And that took us a lot of time to come up with a plan.
I'm not being funny, but you know how the airplanes have the inflatable,
rides.
I'm not joking when I'm saying this. My brain, like as a problem solver, I'm sitting here thinking you send 2 adults down and you're just like catch, and you start sending them down as fast as you can.
We just figure we're gonna lay down the elders in the church, the deacons in the church, just have the kids jump on top of them. They'll be all right. We'll figure it out.
I had to laugh before because you said part-time in quotes. And for those of you that maybe didn't see the quotes or listening at a later time on Iheart Media or our podcast, what's funny about that is the fact that whenever it's synonymous with church and ministry, right? Whenever you do quotes, that means it's actually twice as much as your full-time job.
Yes.
So yeah. So there was a piece of time for me when, and thankfully we've adjusted and kind of moved forward with and evolved with different things. But yeah, there was a piece of time where I was part-time or volunteering, and Paul knows how this works, but I was actually spending 50 to 60 hours a week at the church and then working. So it can get pretty crazy for sure.
And as a volunteer chaplain, I literally would have guys that would call me, and Steve, you'll appreciate the humor in this. One afternoon, one of the cops I chaplain, small town, he's on duty. He's coming back from a call. He's code brown. So he's freaking out because he really has to go to the bathroom bad. And he goes, "Hey, are you still at your church?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he's like, "I need you to open every door from the outside to the bathroom stall because I'm coming in hot." And he does all but a slide stop, takes off running and locking the vehicle as he's running, and he starts handing me gear. And so he's handing me like his carrier, he's handing me stuff, and I come up and he runs in, and now as he's running down the hallway, he's like, "You better be praying!" And he runs in. And it was to the point that, like, a lot of times when guys, and by the way, he made it and life was good and so forth. But I loved that because a lot of people would stop off at the church that knew I chaplain, and they'd give me a call from the parking lot and be like, "Hey, where are you at?" And I'd come let them in. And then we would talk about God and the latest, whatever they saw that they needed to talk about. Or sometimes they just want to chew the cud. And I loved having a police car in the parking lot because we weren't in Chicago, but we were sandwiched between two methamphetamine fueled neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So we had lots of fun. And no gang battles, thankfully, but we had a lot of fun, and so I loved having them there. But yes,
yeah, that's it's being this close to Chicago, you get some interesting people. That's to say the least. And we do bust in some of the homeless people, and you guys have talked about that on before on your show on the homeless. And sometimes they tend to come here and they want to stick here, and they don't want to necessarily live in our we run a rescue mission as well, but they don't want to live there. They want to live out on the streets, and we end up finding them in buildings and stuff just because that's where they want to be. So kind of the small town mentality with that.
I tried to get a guy to go to a shelter. I said, "I can get you there. I can take care of you." And I loved his honesty. He goes, "Look, I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to pass the drug test that they make you take every day. So I don't want to go there." And I was like, "Copy that. Where would you like to go?"
Let's find you another place to stay for the you guys talk about different verbal options. And I was taught by one of my predecessors that has since moved to another area, but he's taught me, give people options. Don't just stop at the one, don't always try and tell them what to do, give them options. And sometimes they may not like the other two options you're giving them, such as leaving or doing what you want them to do. But if you give them those options, they'll take one of those options usually. So without having to come up with one of their own. So that works well.
And even I love what you said though, because it's so true. Because I've literally, you see the seasoned police officer that walks up and goes, "Look," and he holds up the set of handcuffs. There's two ways this ends. You can leave now, or you leave with me, and you're not going to like spending the night in jail. And you gave them options. You let them make an adult decision. I literally actually saw a guy at the scene of a verbal domestic go, "Well, I guess you're just going to have to arrest me." And the officer's like, you can tell he's like, "I just gave you an out."
One of the things that my officer friend usually says, and he'll say that like when he's addressing stuff at our church, he'll say, "Well, there's one of two options: with new bracelets or without new bracelets." That's usually how he says it, and most people are like, "Okay, without." They make that.
And I usually tell the people they're not necessarily the most comfortable bracelets to be wearing.
Yeah.
They're not a fashion statement by any means. So.
That's crazy. So I know right where you are. I went to undergrad at Dubuque Emmaus Bible College in Dubuque, Iowa, which is 3 hours west of Chicago, due west. And so I lived out in Iowa for a bit, and then also up in Wisconsin. There was a small church, country church that I was an associate pastor of for a little bit, and but my wife actually worked in Gary as well for a bit, so I kind of know that corridor pretty well. So I'm impressed that you guys are one of the few churches left in the country that actually does a bus ministry still.
Yes.
We actually had at one point, I think we had 7 or 8 buses that we were running in Columbus, and because of COVID, it just got to the point where we couldn't, with Ohio's guidance on sanitizing and stuff like that, we just couldn't do it. So now, I mean, we do still run vans and that sort of thing, and I mean, we've had plenty of interesting safety stories from that. So I can only imagine what you guys deal with on a regular.
We have reports every day. It seems like, of things that happen just because of the nature of the size and so forth. But most of them are fairly good for the most part. Situations end fairly well.
I mean this with nothing but respect, but there was a pastor a long time ago that talked about he didn't want to preach in a cathedral. He wanted to run a mission within a few feet of hell. And I have gone places and done security and ministered in environments that I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is in the same neighborhood at least. And I love the heart. I went to one in Kansas City off of Prospect, and it may not rival Chicago, but it tries. And I think the funniest part, because I have to tell you, funny that went with it. One of the guys that was there was wearing this like tan hoodie, and he's holding a giant cross. And people were coming up and asking us and wondering why there were 25 white people in the neighborhood, and we're talking to him about Jesus. Well, he's underneath this street light, and it's washed out. His hoodie looks white, and I look over and do a double take, and I'm looking at him going, like this, and he looks at me, and I had to walk over and tell him. He flipped his hoodie up, and it was pointed, and I was like, no. And so I went over and I'm like, Josh, you gotta put it down. You gotta put it down. He's like, why? I said, because from over there you look like you're in the KKK. Yeah. And but it was awesome to see people who were in prostitution and gangbanging, and we had a guy in an Aryan gang give his life to the Lord. And he's being loved on by these older black women that are hugging on him, and he's covered in swastikas and lightning bolts. And I loved that and having that impact. And I guarantee you, we were in the same neighborhood as Hades. It was some rough turf.
Yeah. Yeah, there used to be some Robert Taylor homes and so forth in Chicago, like big places. We used to run 2 or 3 buses, and they'd fill because the kids just wanted to get out of that lifestyle for just a few hours and get away somewhere. And they would come here, and sometimes they would bring those problems here. But I was so glad that a lot of them didn't, and they got to enjoy some time away from family and get to hear about the Lord and so forth. It was a good time away for them. So
that's crazy. I went. We had. What was it? A couple weeks ago, I went and did security and executive protection at a revival meeting out in Dayton. And one of the organizations, one of the churches that kind of put everything together, had a street ministry, and they were telling us about some of that too. And what was interesting was the craziness. They were just as concerned about safety as any church, any normal ministry. But what was interesting about it was they had developed a relationship with the pimps and the drug dealers and everything. And it got to, one of the guys told me it got to a point or it has gotten to a point where those folks will actually come to them, and they've had other faiths, like they've had Muslim leaders, just different gangs, all these people, like after they got past the period of realizing that they were just there to preach and help, now they've got all of these gangs and different faith groups that are coming to them and saying, look, we respect what you guys are doing. We don't agree with you.
Praise God.
We appreciate what you're doing in the community, and we're here. And they've even gone to the point of going around to others and saying, don't mess with those guys or you'll have to deal, like, don't mess with the Bible guys or you have to deal with us. Yeah. So it's pretty crazy.
We had this kind of a quick story. We had a guy from our ministry church here that was invited. He came on our buses. He was actually shot when he was younger as a young gang member, shot in the back and was paralyzed from it. And he'd be here every Sunday where all our buses load up, and he still had gang affiliations pretty high up and so forth. And we knew that, but he never brought that here. And if you ever observed anybody with the gang attire, the gang attitude or anything like that, he would wheel himself right up to them and say, just so you know, that's not going to happen here. We're not going to deal with that. And if you do that here, we're going to have the rest of my people to deal with. So it's like his gang kind of peacefully owned our church to some degree, I guess, if you want to call it that. But he would be the first one to go greet our fellow gang members and make sure that they were aware of what the rules were here before we even have to.
I love it.
Crazy. I think it's interesting. I know in Columbus lately we've been dealing a lot more with gangs and that sort of thing, and that's an interesting, certainly an interesting position to be in, and an interesting topic. Maybe we can get into that at some point. But just the idea of, again, being able to witness and minister to those folks while trying to stay safe and trying to have that balance of saying, look, we're not really interested in what you're doing, but don't bring it here. Because we've had people, like when we were running our bus ministry too, we've had people come in that most of our church folks didn't know, anything, like didn't think twice about the clothes or the style of their dress or anything. And we had one guy come in, and he had a handkerchief hanging out of his back pocket. And I was like, okay, it's a handkerchief. I didn't think twice about it. And one of the officers grabbed me and pulled me aside, and he's like, do you know what, he's like, do you know anything about that handkerchief? And I'm like, no, it looks like a handkerchief. And he's like, yeah, but the stripes and the colors. And I'm like, so do we need to ask him to leave? And he's like, no, we're good. But so there's a lot of stuff like that. I know that happens as well. That's it can be kind of crazy sometimes, but, we're actually at the half-hour mark, so we'll go ahead and take a quick sponsor break, and then we come back. We'll actually be talking more with Steve, so don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back with you guys.
Nobody thinks it will happen to them, but with over 2,000 emergency phone calls per month to our independent program attorney answered hotline, it's closer to home than you think. At U.S. Law Shield, we give you exclusive access to our 24/7, 365 emergency hotline, not a call center, direct access to our network of independent program attorneys. With a price point of only $10.95 per month and unlimited attorney hours for criminal and civil defense, U.S. Law Shield provides you with unparalleled service and protection where it matters most. No other program comes close. We believe an educated member is an empowered member. We do this by providing educational resources featuring seasoned attorneys, firearms instructors, law enforcement, and experts in all areas of self-defense law. We at U.S. Law Shield believe peace of mind should come with simple and affordable protection.
With over 50 years of experience with religious and nonprofit organizations, Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates understands that your congregation is different from a traditional business. We're here to fulfill your needs, coming to you while creating a personal plan for your budget and size. From your local community to around the globe, we are advocates for you. Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates, your partner in service.
Welcome to the Church Safety Guys broadcast. The Church Safety Guys help church and place of worship safety and security teams all over North America through our broadcasts, online communities, conferences, trainings, resources, and the all-new Church Security app. Download it today Help us continue to reach churches by supporting our sponsors, purchasing our resources, and consider becoming a ministry partner by making a monthly or one-time donation. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this broadcast with your team. And now, back to the broadcast.
All right, welcome back to the Church Safety and Security broadcast. I am James, and joined by Paul and Steve McGraw is our guest tonight. And I was just kind of curious, Steve, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure, and I apologize if you mentioned it already, but what is the membership of your church? Like, how many services do you guys have, and how many folks come?
So we're kind of, our auditorium, main auditorium, can seat about 6,500
Okay.
in the auditorium itself. And then we have multiple services going on at one time. We have like a Spanish speaking service going on. We have a couple different teen services, children's services, and so forth. So not everybody's usually in the main auditorium at one time. So we typically will have about 10 services going on at one time on a Sunday morning and just in different locations. Altogether, we'll run, on a big day, we'll run about 12,000 people on property.
Okay.
Like today, I think we're probably closer to 9 or 10 on a day like today. Today was a little bit more of an average day. But it kind of varies, obviously, with COVID and so forth, that it dropped numbers down significantly during that time. We didn't run buses and all that kind of stuff for a while. And then, because especially with like crossing the state lines and stuff, but then we're coming back up on our numbers now. So I'd say we were about maybe 8,000 to 10,000 a day.
Okay.
So I want to go back to that, and I want you guys to think about this at home. Think about coordinating all the volunteers. Think about all the sanctuaries. Think about missing kids. Think about missing items. Think about a thief loose on campus. You get a report of somebody and you're looking for somebody. And if they know the church, which when I was a kid, there were places in that church I knew about that very few people did. And so you got kids that can disappear. That's a lot.
Every one of those you were talking about, I could check mark off today.
Oh, I guarantee it. And you got stuff in the parking lot.
Out in a cold sweat.
Oh, because just dealing with all that stuff, and then you have to deal with state and local law with firearms. You have to deal. You've got different situations going on. Now you're adding to the mix the gang situations, which I was in a church as a kid that a guy thought that he was a Crip and his buddies, some of these other guys were trying to form a local group of the Bloods. And most people were like, you guys need to stop talking before the real guys show up. But he brought a Beretta handgun to church. And my dad, who was one of the most gentle men I've ever met in my life, was the only one with the intestinal fortitude to walk up and say, you need to take that out and put it in your car. And they were, and that was an unarmed, very gentle man. I'm mostly a gentle man, but I'm wired different than him. And that was a very brave thing for him to do. And so then you're talking about medical issues and you're trying to get ambulances moved around and not interrupt services. There's so many variables that you've got in there, and then you're trying to let traffic out. You're trying to deal with the local lights. You're trying to let services out at different times where maybe this service isn't hitting as that service is hitting. In my parking lot right now in my church, you better know Jesus between the second and third service because y'all playing Frogger out there. So I'm just unpacking in my brain, as Mike Sawyer likes to say, I'm unpacking all the stuff I can think of off the top of my head. And there's more, I guarantee it. That's crazy.
Yeah, you mentioned a gangbanger, necessarily, as we would call them, coming in with a gun or something. This was years ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago. We had a 7-year-old show up who'd gotten picked on the week before, found his uncle's gun and came with it. And thankfully, we had a worker on the bus that just happened to see it in his jacket, called us. We had to deal with that whole issue. But he was later, about 10 years later, he came back as a gang member and wanted vengeance and had a similar situation, just 10 years older. So you just sometimes that just kind of comes back every few years, it seems like. So deal with the same people sometimes. But it's, there's a lot of good things that happen in a ministry this size. I try and keep that in mind with my guys is, I reiterate to them, you need to be inside the service. We have services Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Wednesday night is my night. My assist chief that works for me knows that that's my night. Unless it's an absolute nightmare, I don't work that night. I stay available per se, but I don't deal with things. I don't wear a radio. I don't wear an earpiece, anything like that one there. That's my family night. I try and encourage my guys to do the same because you can get burnt out if you don't actually see what the Lord's doing sometimes. And they're just constantly working. In a smaller church, a lot of my people I talk to across the country, they get so wrapped up because they feel so responsible being the only one that can handle the situation. So they put themselves out of service all the time, and that can just be a real dangerous thing. I've seen too many of my friends that I worked with for so many years in security burn out and leave the ministry and not be involved anymore because they just got burned out from dealing with the negative side so much and not seeing so much of the positive side. So especially
I went a month once, literally unable to sit through an entire service because we had so many arrests on campus, drugs being found, weapons being found, and it doesn't hold a candle to what you're talking about. But we found a knife on our playground, and we were finding drug paraphernalia. We had mules trying to hide in our church from the local popo, and they're my buddies. So I'm like, y'all come right on in, you know. And but it was to the point that I didn't get to sit through an entire service for a month. And I think the Lord showed that to me for a couple of reasons. One was so we can talk about burnout and make sure we don't do it, because James and I have talked about that a lot. We both experienced it. But then when I'm doing the chaplain thing with officers and they're like, the world's falling apart, I'm losing my faith in humanity. I'm like, right, but you're dealing with the 2% of people in your community that you constantly arrest. If you didn't have to arrest them, you wouldn't have a job. But we joke about that, but it's true. And imagine, guys, you guys that are watching at home playing the home game, think about what Steve's talking about. At that level where it would be so easy to be like, I'm the hub of this wheel and I can't take any time off. He's insisting that he gets a service with his family so he doesn't get burned out. This is wisdom, because James and I were talking this last week about the fact that you can, if you find yourself thinking of reasons to leave the sanctuary during your downtime, you're probably not walking right where you need to with the Lord, and you don't want the Holy Spirit to convict you of something, you know, so you want to break contact there and leave the sanctuary quickly. This is huge. And you have I'm being very honest here. You have every reason to feel like you're indispensable, but obviously you've created a structure with lieutenants within your structure that can function without you. And that's another thing. I never was able to do that with my own team. I never was able to get to the point that I could truly unplug for full services.
Well, when I went back to my new police department more full time, because I was part time at the other department at that time, when I decided to go back in full time into law enforcement, I knew I had to restructure because I felt like I was doing everything for everybody, and I was the only one able to answer every call, kind of a thing. And it just kind of got to me that I couldn't do that anymore and work a full time job outside the ministry. And so I actually had to restructure my department, put people in place to kind of deal with those issues, train them up to deal with them, and put a little faith behind them, and that the Lord used them the right way when I'm not there. And thankfully, that's kind of really built a good role for a lot of people, and they've stepped up to fulfill that role. And now I didn't want to do that before. It was hard for me to give up that for a while. But now that I've been able to do that, I see that there's really people out there that can deal with a lot of situations. And I'm glad to look right now.
I want to follow that quickly, James, and then I've been talking way too much. I want you to come in on this behind this, but I want you guys to think about this at home, because what happens? What Scripture says, "I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." What happens if you at home, who are leading your team, and you have not created that culture of independent thought? What happens if Steve, the person is they're incapacitated due to illness or some injury on the job or whatever? Suddenly you're gone and the team crumbles and it's gone. And we've all seen that happen, to where that one person has made themselves a hinge pin, whether they meant to or not. And the guy that runs my church's security team that I'm at now, he's got a background in EP, so he's executive protection background, law enforcement background, and he's run SWAT teams. And so I happily follow this guy, and he's close to the end of his law enforcement career, and he calls me Lieutenant Paul now within his structure, because I'm always helping him do stuff. And so in a formal email he sent out the other day, he's like, "Lieutenant Paul and I are talking about having an upcoming training. When do you guys want to get together?" But you have to build that structure, because you aren't indispensable. And what happens if you go on vacation or something? James, we've talked about the phone calls that you can get when you're not there.
I think it's a hard thing, and every church is different. We've stressed that for sure. And whether your church has 80 or 8,000, right? There has to be, to an extent, there has to be some type of organization and structure, because if there isn't, then you will get burned out. one of the things, and kind of to piggyback, and we've gotten a couple of questions I do want to circle back to that I think are good. But for myself, I've gotten to that point where I'll turn, like you said, Steve, I won't put my radio in. I'll walk into the sanctuary, I'll turn my radio off, and I've got my phone, and I'll say to, whoever's in charge that day, look, because I understand to an extent, if something medical happens, I'm the most senior medically trained individual that we have right now. So if something happens medically, I've given them permission to come, text me, call me, whatever. If I'm sitting there in the service and my phone rings and I see, one of the other supervisors or team leads, their name come up, then I know something's going on, and I'll quietly leave and try and help, and then come back. For me, I've had to have a lot of grace with that too, because honestly, there have been times where I've walked out and I get to them and they're like, this is the first time in a bit that I've gotten to sit with my family or my wife. And they're like, well, is it okay if that person parks right there, or should we? And I'm just like, okay, and I'm being facetious and kind of joking, but I think everybody kind of knows what I'm talking about. It's not life threatening. So expressing that and explaining that, if you have several people, is always helpful. And just be like, hey, I'm not trying to be rude, but look, I really need a break. I need to be able to worship and recharge my batteries and sit with my family, because I'm, even though I'm in ministry, I've got God first, my family second, or my wife second, my family third. And my family and my wife need to know that sitting and worshiping is a priority for me, not just serving. And I think that if we get those mixed up, which I'm not saying I never get them mixed up, because I do, everybody gets them mixed up from time to time, but I want to set a legacy, and I want to set an example that's well balanced for my kids to understand that I can serve, but also be concerned about my family. I don't want my kids growing up being 120% serving at the church and never really concerned about their family. So it's a balance. It's a very structured balance of being graceful to folks and also drawing the line and saying, look, I need you to run this service right now so that, I can go do this, or I can do that. Sometimes emphasizing that takes some time for the churches. And one of the questions that we've gotten is, so what do you, and we've gotten it several times from different platforms that we're streaming to, what do you do if you don't have a person that's delegated to? And, the reality is there's no easy answer. If you can't find someone else that you could say, like, pull aside and disciple and kind of, show the way and say, look, do you want to serve with me? Is it possible for you to watch the front door? Or whatever, you kind of have to think through and analyze what do you feel, if you're the only person that's doing it, what do you feel is the most important thing to watch and do? If it's a smaller church and you're on the inside, maybe it would give you comfort to have somebody by the door. So maybe it's not an actual safety team member, maybe it's a door greeter or another deacon, or it doesn't have to necessarily be someone that's trained as extensively as you are, or maybe somebody that's not a sheepdog. But right. If you can grab that person and be like, you know what, I really need a break. Could you do me a favor and just watch the door and let me know if you see anything that's odd? We've talked about that many times on the broadcast, with overlapping and pulling resources from other ministries like door greeters and that sort of thing, for the sake of saying, look, I'm just being honest. I need a break. I need you to cover for me. And that person may not appreciate or really put the value on safety and security that you do. I get that. I understand. And that can be frustrating too, that somebody might not take it serious. So you want to try and find somebody that maybe takes it a little bit serious, and and respects it as much as, probably not as much as you do, but at the same time, we also have to care for ourselves, and we have to realize that, what, for my standards, no one, and I did a video about this not too long ago, nobody's going to understand your motivation for doing what you do. Right. And I said that on the video, and I'm going to say it again. No one will understand completely your motivation, what motivates you to do something, because you're where you are, because God put it on your heart. He developed a passion to be a sheepdog. We're all the same. I can relate. I can relate to Steve serving. I can relate to Paul serving. I can relate to Mike serving. But I don't know what motivates you. Right. So at the end of the day, when I look at it and say, okay, if I have another person, maybe they're not as passionate as I am about this, but if I have another person that can do small things like watch the parking lot or watch the front door, then to me, that's a win. And they, they may not necessarily understand that, but or understand your love and your passion for it, but you're taking steps, and maybe that's enough to get somebody interested to come back and say, well, why do you do this? Tell me about the safety and security ministry at this church. And that could drive them to do other things. One of the things, and I'll throw it over to Paul real quick, because I know he wanted to follow, and we're kind of short on time, but one of the things that I always like to say is I use the acronym FAT, and it's in a couple of our books and stuff like that. Not you, Paul, you're not fat, sorry. It's faithful, available, and teachable, right? So if I have someone that faithfully attends, faithfully serves, is available and willing to learn, and is teachable, it doesn't matter if they're trained to the hilt. What matters is they're someone that God is working with, that has brought to you, or maybe you've gone after them, and they can be involved, and they can do things, and they can be the individual that leave you and helps you with your service. So I'll go ahead and throw it over to Paul while I check my internet connection. It's acting up here.
So on the extreme opposite end of what we're talking about, Steve's in a mega church, and you guys have just a few people that show up every Sunday or every service. But then on the extreme opposite end, most folks are in a church of 100 or less. And I talked to a church recently where this guy said, I'm the only person with a sheepdog heart. My pastor's on board, but nobody else cares. And he goes, Paul, I'm burned out. Basically is where he's headed. And I've actually had this conversation a lot of times, so I may be accidentally stringing two conversations together, but he was the only one that had the sheepdog heart, and he was the only one that was willing to do it. And he was getting really, really stressed out because he was not in there for worship. He was not in there for communion. He was not in there for the message. And he was at church, but the word of God says, do not forsake the fellowship, the gathering together, as some are in the habit of doing. He was at church, but he was not at church. And I said, what do you think about, would your pastor be okay with getting a set of cameras, a very small church, and a tablet, and you could put the tablet in some kind of a cover and flip it over the pew in front of you, and you can, praise God, look at the screen, communion, look at the screen, and you could, because there's no way for him to do everything. And, it's one of those churches that's so small that when the pastor says, dearly beloved, people get embarrassed. And they just feel like he's talking to them. And that's a little old school, small church humor. But that's very real. I mean, Steve's in a church that no matter how hard he tries, he's not going to get to know every single person that comes in and out the door. You could walk up to somebody, Steve, and I'm at a church this level. James, you're at church this level. We could walk up to somebody and be like, hey, is it your first? You've been here for 5 years. I am so sorry. And you see them looking up at the ceiling. Yeah, you think they're a tourist, And but at the very bottom of that, I've literally had people tell me it's me and one other guy, or it's me. And you're not going to be able to patrol the parking lot, but you know what? You can have a camera pointed at the nursery. You can have a camera pointed at the bathrooms. You can have a camera pointed at the foyer in the parking lot. And that way you can have a pretty good idea. And maybe you set it where it rotates, or you set it where you can see all the screens and you can tap the screen. There's ways to still get plugged in and get fed I've flown quite a bit recently, Steve, and what you're talking about reminds me of an airport more than it reminds me of a church. You bring a lot of people through.
It can be that way. Our college that we run has we've sent a lot of pastors and missionaries across the United States and the world and so forth. And they'll call me up and they're smaller churches and we'll talk through things. And I often tell them, when you only have one guy doing security, they're going to get burnt out. That guy's got to have that direct path to the pastor, because if he doesn't go to the pastor, he's going to burn out. But at the same time, you need to get your other people in the church that may not be security mindset, may not be safety mindset, to at least take on some of the roles like a greeter and so forth. And then they can call that one guy that may be sitting in the service and let them know what's going on. So, it's like James said, it's kind of like finding the right path for every church, because every church is different. Every church location is different. Some are around the country, some are in the inner city, some are, out in the middle of nowhere, and there's only one guy and the pastor, like you said, and the security guard is also the guy taking the offering and doing everything else that day. So it's kind of like just trying to find that role, but if at all possible, make sure your role doesn't overlap sometime in a service, or even some personal time with the pastor himself or somebody like that can do a devotional and spend time with you directly, because sometimes you got to find those roles, and it's not available to us. Like me, I can kind of depend on my team. I built that team, so I haven't built it. Somebody else built it, I took over, but that team's been built so that I can take some time for myself, and they can take some time and rotate through it if you have that availability to do.
Amen. Well, and praying for the right people. And then I know we're wrapping up, but years ago, I was kind of complaining about where I was at. And here I am, a civilian police chaplain. And I was talking to somebody that was, pretty knowledgeable. And I said, I really struggle to have enough people on deck. And this person's like, well, can't you lean on the cops that go to church there? And I'm like, well, we don't have cops that go to our church. And they're like, you're a chaplain? And I said, I'm not like creating followers after me. But then I started really thinking about it for the ones that were unchurched. I was never putting pressure on them to go, you need to pick my church. But I started changing my thinking. And and I'm big on reaching into the first responder community, but not making them feel taxed. I had a chief of police that told me, he said, Paul, the only time I can turn my back to the door is when I know your boys are watching the door. I really want to sit with my family. And I've heard that more than one time. They're like, I've seen you shoot. I've seen you train. Dude, you guys are squared away. I really want to sit with my family. And I'm like, I'll stop talking now. You guys have a great service. And so we can't overtax our cops, because this, Steve, if you're not careful, you're like, all I deal with is scuzz buckets, and even the scuzz buckets that are trying to come into my church. And it's hard to keep a ministry. It's hard enough to keep a ministry mindset as a police officer. But then when you don't ever get a break, and anybody that's been burned out with church safety has an idea of what that is. So,
right. We have the church our size, just to give you an idea. It's a large church. We have 2 police officers that go to church here, and we have 1 fireman out of all of that large crowd. That's all we have. And I'm sorry, we have 2 firemen. There's a second one that just started. But and the other police officer that's not me, he does not work security at all, doesn't want to. He wants to be involved in the church while he's there. And that's the way we keep it, because I understand that completely. Now, he still carries, because obviously we're not having any problem there. But
right. Well, and quickly, and I know we got to close out. I know James is going to want to say something. We're going to close out. I really started ministering into my community and trying to get events at my church, which the church I'm at now for the last 2.5 years, when I walked in the door, they were already doing celebrations for first responders and events and things like that, and helping them to understand, pre-COVID, pre some of the politics we're dealing with right now. Their passion was to celebrate community heroes, and they wanted to be a church that was a first responder church. And I'm like, my people, because it took me 10 years to get my last church, God bless them, great people, on board with the idea of holding first responder events. And I just throw this to you. Maybe you can get a pastor to seize on this opportunity, because as big as you are, imagine the positive impact you could have in your community, doing stuff for fire departments, doing stuff for police departments and in EMS. And I don't know what that looks like. And obviously it's not anything you need to spearhead, but with 10,000 people, how crazy would it be to hold you've probably done this even, but a first responder appreciation service?
We've done that a few times, to be honest, and because of the region we're in, it's not a very well accepted thing from churches. It's just kind of the region. But our church has done a lot of things for our community, police officers, firefighters. We took like a U-Haul truckload of just goodies to the department. Our local agency for our church area is about 210, 212 officers. And so we took them a U-Haul truckload to support them. And then we went to where our college and schools are. We also went to those departments. But they're just not, it's not a big investment in churches for a lot of the guys in this area. It's just kind of a regional thing, I guess. So.
Interesting.
I truly hate hearing that. That's a tough road, because if you don't feel appreciated as a first responder, it's hard to stay. James, back to you.
Well, no, I'm gonna say thank you. Thanks so much, Steve, for joining us tonight, and I appreciate your ministry, and definitely you still have what is the YouTube channel that you have your videos and stuff on?
It's just under my name, Steve McGraw. I haven't posted there in quite some time due to time constraints and so forth and making videos, but it's just under my name, Steve McGraw, under YouTube.
You're not a busy guy? What? No. But seriously, I will say, if you get a chance, check out his videos. And the reason I liked them was because they were very specific and concise. You did a great job recording them, and it's the type of thing where he actually recorded them in small segments, so you could very easily play a segment for your team, like in a devotional in a morning or something like that. But great content, great stuff there. So Paul, you want to close this in prayer?
Yeah, let's pray this out.
Sure.
Dearly Father, Lord God, I come to you tonight thankful for the opportunity to visit with people that have been doing this a long time and with great skill, professional teams, and ministering, Lord God, as we said, literally in the same neighborhood as hell, not trying to be funny, but to quote a pastor. And Lord God, I thank you for what they're doing. I thank you for the impact they're having. I thank you for the favor they've been given, Lord God, even with people that are not righteous. And I thank you for that. It encourages me. And Lord God, it's something that as the church safety and security world becomes more and more professional, it's going to be the veterans that have been doing this a long time that will be able to talk about the pitfalls, the things to avoid, the things that work and don't work potentially at a mega church level. And Lord God, we're still in an era where even some large churches don't have any kind of security. Lord God, I ask that you would help the pastors of these churches to realize they need to keep a weather eye. They need to have the sheepdog watching over the flock. Lord God, I ask that you would bless Steve, that you bless his ministry, that you keep him safe as an officer, Lord God, that you bless him and his family. And I ask this in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up. So if you've spent time with us tonight, thanks for hanging out with us. And as always, you can always visit us at churchsafetyguys.com. We have some great resources on there, and also feel free to download the Church Security app, because there's new content and different things that we've put on there, and we're actually uploading all the time. So feel free to check that out. I think next week we are actually going to have Dan Blevins in, and Dan has, I think, I've got to double check with him, but Dan's been kind of taking care of some family stuff, and we're real excited to have him back on the broadcast and show, and really looking forward to that. So in the meantime, if there's something that we can do to help you guys out with your ministry, please feel free to reach out, and we will do the best we can for that. So Until next time, have a great week. Have a great night. Take care. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams. Join the discussion online, and for other great resources, download the Church Security app or visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and Semper Disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.